Hello, welcome back to the SFG20 Virtual Summit. My name's Henry Ropner, and the next session is on the Building Safety Act. I'd just like to make a few introductions, starting on my left-hand side.
Thank you. Rachel Davidson. I'm the Director of Specialist Knowledge for the Building Engineering Services Association. So for the past year, we've been offering support and guidance to our members, trying to navigate the way through the Building Safety Act, and that's the focus of my role. In terms of my experience, I've been working in competence and compliance for a great deal of decades, certainly working alongside government and the industry to develop competence and compliance schemes.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'm Mark Walker. I'm a director in the MEP team for Hydrock, now Stantec. I'm also the healthcare sector lead and chair of the SFG Healthcare Group and SFG board member as well. I've been in the industry nearly 40 years next year. Started out on the tools as a plumber, straight through degree, etc. And I've lived and breathed the Building Safety Act for the last couple of years. So that's my experience in a nutshell.
So hi, my name is Jason Instrell. I'm a senior electrical engineer. I'm a technical author for SFG20 as well as an industry lead. I'm an IT industry representative. I've been in the industry for 27 years as an electrical engineer. So yeah, lived and breathed that industry and the Building Safety Act, similar to mine. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. So my name is Henry Ropner. I chair SFG20. For those of you who listened in earlier, talked a little bit about the adoption of digital technologies into the built environment, which I think is going to be something that is going to be helpful and central to the delivery of the Building Safety Act. I'd just like to start off by perhaps turning to Rachel. I think there's been quite a lot of work that BESA have been doing around this area, really trying to support industry and help people clarify what their obligations and responsibilities are under the Act. And that's something we may come on to a bit later on to really talk to actually where some areas perhaps might be less clear than they perhaps should be and what might need to be done to clarify those things. But I think that you recently did a piece of work with BESA to understand what the awareness is of the Act and perhaps some of the things that people may need to perhaps learn a bit more about. I just wonder whether you might be able to give us a bit of a synopsis. I think it's quite hot off the press, so a bit of a sneak peek of what might be coming out in that.
Yeah, sure. So we've been working as BESA for the last 12 plus months trying to build awareness of the Building Safety Act within BESA membership and really help them navigate the journey. And we came to a point mid-year where we actually wanted to answer three questions. We wanted to understand not just from BESA members, but from an industry point of view, particularly on specialist supply chain, on mechanical electrical contractors, what their level of awareness of the Building Safety Act was. And of that awareness, who actually understood their roles and responsibilities, because it's very different being aware to actually understanding what your responsibilities are within the Act. And thirdly, what steps businesses had actually taken to put themselves on that journey of compliance. So what had they changed in terms of their business practices? And so we ran the research over a period of 3 months, and we sent it out to over 20,000 companies. And we did have a high level of return, but not as much return as, we had over 300 respondents, but we sent it out to 20,000 people, 20,000 companies. And so the respondents that came back to us were those companies in the know, with the most knowledge of the Building Safety Act. And I think it's probably a good point to make that the Building Safety Act isn't just about higher risk buildings. It applies to all buildings, and it has more stringent requirements for higher risk buildings.
And that's quite a common misconception, isn't it? That
Absolutely. And because we live and breathe it, we have this level of assumption that people know this. But we still have a massive proportion of clients in the sector with their head in the sand thinking, this doesn't apply to me because I don't work on higher risk buildings. But some of the statistics that we got back were encouraging, but also it gave us an insight to the scale of the challenges that we have that lie ahead. So overall, there was good awareness. Over 88% of respondents were actually aware of the Building Safety Act. However, only 1 in 10 actually understood their duty holder roles, which is quite alarming considering these are the companies that have the most knowledge. And it was a good spread of companies because it wasn't just those contractors working on higher risk buildings, it was medium-sized and smaller companies. So it's the awareness and understanding is patchy, and it's mixed depending on the project and the building type. And only 9% of respondents had actually made any significant changes to their business processes to help compliance with the Act. So, and the report reveals that there's massive amount of, if you like stats, have a look at the report. It's fascinating. And then when we asked in terms of, well, what are the biggest challenges that you face in compliance? And there was 3 areas, and the first one would probably be no surprise to any of us sitting on the panel today, but it was about legal requirements, actually understanding the legal terminology, knowing where to look. It is such a huge piece of regulation with multiple layers of secondary legislation, an extremely large amount of statutory guidance, which can often be conflicting. So that was one of the biggest challenges. The second was actually meeting compliance requirements. And the third was on how to measure and assess competence of both the individuals that are employed and also of the supply chain companies.
And when's the report going to be published, or has it been published already?
It has been published already, so it will be.
So it's available via BESA if you wanted to take a look at it.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, the competency thing. I mean, Mark, you come from industry. Is obviously a new area really, and it's been driven largely by the Building Safety Act. What are you seeing from a sort of coal-faced contractor experience in terms of application of competency under the Act, and what implications are having that for how you go about doing what you need to do?
So I think competence is a wide area, and I think there's a lot of people struggle with actually being asked about their competence, and I think we need to understand that the Building Safety Act is there for people to get a feel and to understand that they have to be competent to work on these buildings, whatever type of building it is, from a small building to a higher risk building. And I think the competency in the industry at the moment is, although we have competent people, there's gaps, and there's gaps between designer and contractor, and I think we need to start looking at closing those gaps. And it's a particular big area, because people say, well, I've been in the industry, like myself, nearly 40 years. Well, I'm competent, but how do I demonstrate that competency? And that competency is demonstrated by your skills, knowledge, experience and behaviour, with behaviours being key. And I think there needs to be a massive culture change within the industry to work together more collaboratively to actually build that competency. So it's sort of a roundabout answer, but we're all individually competent or allegedly competent, but we've got to demonstrate that in such a way that we're not afraid to say, well, I don't know that, that's not within my skill set. We've got to be able to be honest with people. So it's all about honesty and looking at your own behaviours as well. So if anything I would say around competency is to make sure you change your behaviour and look at your own competency and actually say, well, I can do that, but I can't do that. And, employers need to be open to that, and industry needs to be open, and there needs to be more training around competency. But I think we get a lot of the questions around competency are all different. There needs to be one single competency questionnaire for an individual or a company to be able to measure people, if that's the right word to use, or measure their competency for a particular project.
Because it's not unusual to have competency in lots of other industries, whether it be medical or financial or other professional services. So this is a well-worn path in sort of from a CPD perspective, as you know, which we could follow.
The thing from when we're looking at competency, the CDM regulations, what was brought in 1994, revised in 2007 and 2015, it was all around competency as well. So we shouldn't be afraid that the Building Safety Act is asking us to be competent, because we should have already been competent. And it's also about having that relevant CPD as well. So, you know, your CPD is not just reading a magazine, it's actually going to a seminars such as this, speaking or exhibitions, and learning about new technology that's coming in, learning new skills. That's all about your CPD, because anybody can read 3 or 4 copies of the BESA, and you know, you could say you're competent, but you actually need to get out there and do a proper CPD.
Jason, I mean, you live and breathe this as well on a day-to-day basis. Have you got any particular thoughts on how the industry is adjusting to that, and perhaps some of the changes that are sort of rippling through off the back of the Building Safety Act work?
Well, I see quite a bit of this with sort of the two hats on, really. If I look at the role I play with the IET, so I was talking about competency there and CPD, you know, I have to do 250 hours of CPD myself, and again, I see a lot of that coming through where I've read this magazine or I've looked at this. It has to be a lot deeper than that. You know, in my time on site, competence has always been something that people don't want to talk about. So, as I literally said, someone will say to you, "Are you competent?" You go, "Yes, I'm competent." But what does that actually mean? And what the Building Safety Act is trying to do is it's trying to effectively now circulate that competence and say you must be competent. We had the Building Act 1984 bringing in competency. The Building Safety Act has now amended that. All we're trying to do is get a higher level of competence. Same with the electrical industry. You know, we have all these governing bodies around it, electrical, mechanical, saying you must be competent, you must be registered by certified bodies such as the NIC, NAPIT, etc. You must prove your competence. But if you're proving your competence on 4 jobs a year, you're not proving your competence throughout the year, are you? You must have skilled engineers. And I think there's still quite a bit of work to get out of there when we look at the scale of a project. So if we go back at the beginning of a project, all these people and these individuals need to get together at the start. So from my time running a business, I would get a blank drawing sent to me and say, price this job. By then, it's already had numerous individuals looking at a project, architects, designers. All we're saying is these people need to get together at the start, bring these designs together, bring your competence together at the start, and just think then how easier it will be. You know?
I think the definition of competence has changed over the decades, hasn't it?
Yeah,
When I came into the industry, I used to do and administer indentured apprenticeships for H&V fitters, and their competence was defined by completing a 4-year indentured apprenticeship. And then after another 5 years, they were deemed as, if they had enough experience as an advanced fitter through an employer's endorsement. And then in the 90s, Competence, the major contracting groups wanted a measure to be able to measure competence of the workers on their sites by one standard, and the NVQs at the level 2s came in, and at that point grandfather rights and employers' endorsements were still granted for those individuals that were highly experienced within the industry but had no formal qualifications. And then it's changed with the Building Safety Act. The definition of competence is now, there is a legal definition of competence. As Mark, you said, within the building regulations, it is now skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours. And the knowledge part is the qualification.
But it's from the top, isn't it, as well?
But that's right. So for companies, what that means is their competent management systems must now be fuller and more robust to record those skills, that knowledge, that experience, and the behaviours.
So the behaviour side of it is the key to the competence as well, because you can have all the skills and knowledge, but if you have a bad attitude to what you're working, your behaviour's wrong, and or that'll do, or this is all right, you've got to make sure that everything is correct. So it's a change of behaviour, and it's a big cultural change as well within the industry. And we've all, like Jason said, we've all got to work together.
And the implications of not having competency within your supply chain or within your processes under the new Building Safety Act are pretty significant. But just to put a point on that, what are the implications now for an accountable person or for somebody who's responsible for building? I mean, it's a criminal liability now, as I understand it.
It is, but what we've also got to be clear as well, if you are I think where it's misinterpreted, if you're a building owner, you've also got to understand competence fully now. So in the past, you could have a building owner who would get in a contractor to do the work. The contractor will get multiple subcontractors in, and so on and so on. What we're saying now is the building owner must understand what competence is, not just the contractors and the subcontractors. It needs to go all the way back in that chain now. Rather than it's a huge gap that was missing. If you think from an owner to an architect to a designer to a contractor, all that multiple line of people before it gets to the contractor, you were asking the main contractor, the tier one contractor, whatever, to make sure his subcontractors were competent. That's one subcontractor taking the electrical contractor, may be registered, may be shown as competent. But what about the actual electricians? What about the mechanical engineers? The skills. And we mustn't be afraid to say, look, I know this. It's like we've discussed, I'm electrical, I know some mechanical, I'm not fully competent in that. We mustn't be afraid to say, I'm not competent in that. It's not my area. So if it's not your area, get somebody else in who is. A specialist in fire, a specialist in mechanical. But that owner, that person standing at the top of that hill, has got to understand that supply chain and understand what competence actually is. So when you are getting somebody in, you know that the electrical contractor is registered competent, the mechanical is registered competent, whatever that may be with. And you're also then relying on that director, the owner of that company, to make sure that the staff is competent. So this is a web. This is a huge web. It's not simple to just say it's your fault. We would each have a responsibility to make sure competence is there, and behaviourally, as we've said, if you're not competent in that skill.
I think that goes down to contracting staff as well.
Yeah.
So if you've got a subcontractor who is deemed competent by the member of all different trade associations, etc., and they've got all the qualifications, but if you're taking staff on to fulfil a contract, you've got to make sure all your contracting staff, if you're from an agency or wherever, are all competent as well. So it's again, I can't say it enough, it's a big cultural change within the industry. We've got to make sure that we are deemed competent, because there's been a lot of lack of confidence within the industry from the general public to the industry. So we've got to build that confidence back up by being a competent industry and a safe industry.
Yeah.
And that goes, it doesn't matter whether you're a contractor, whether you're a designer, an architect, whatever, maintainer, facility manager, you've got to be competent and you've got to change the culture in the industry.
It's a linear line, isn't it? It's a linear line, and making sure you're basically all on the same page now.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Building Safety Act for a moment, and we remove the complication of the legislation and the amendments in there, and we look at it, we say, what is it? It's a linear line. We're putting everybody now on the same linear line. And we can no longer blame a contractor, we can no longer blame subcontractor. Everybody's to blame, i.e. everybody is to be competent in the legislation, in the regulations, qualified.
How much confusion do you think there's still left, Dave? I mean, we're making it sound probably that it's clearer than perhaps it is. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on where you think there is clarity under the Act as it stands today, and where you think there might still be some muddy waters that really, industry need to help, and the government need to help to try and clear up. Where do you think we are at the moment?
I would say contractors. I mean, you probably deal with this higher than me in BESA, Rachel, but contractors work incredibly hard, and the majority of contractors out there are trying to do their best to tie this in. But we've also got to have, again, it just goes back to everybody working together. And if we all get together at the start of a contract and we talk and we design, we're going to make sure that competence is there.
And I think that works for the higher risk buildings because the safeguards and mechanisms are in place, such as the gateway points. So I've just been doing a round of regional meetings with our BESA member contractors, and I fear that there's a gap. So for those tier 1 contractors and large tier 2s that are working with clients on higher risk buildings, there's a high level of awareness. There's a good understanding, but it is still a very challenging road that they're on in terms of compliance with the Act and understanding. But it's moving in the right direction. But for the tier 2 and tier 3 contractors that are working on buildings, they're all in scope of the Building Safety Act. But for those higher risk buildings that don't need to go through the gateway points and the golden thread and the mandatory occurrence reporting, even though the contractors want to do the highest quality job, what's actually happening within industry still, and particularly with the clients, is that the clients are still procuring on the fastest speed to complete a project and the lowest cost. And quality is still not coming into the equation at all. And until we actually have some regulatory enforcement around that area, I think the pace of change is just too slow. And my sense from talking to the contractors is that divide is actually growing. The pace of moving forward isn't matching at the moment, and so we need to work on that. We need to work with the regulator and industry, particularly with client education. And one of our respondents on the survey said, "Educate us, don't intimidate us," which I thought was a really good key insight. And as a trade association, that's where we play a key role.
It's a supportive role, but it's an important. But I think there is a lot of people who probably have been feeling quite intimidated by suddenly their newfound responsibilities, and so I think that's where hopefully BESA has got a very important role in that education piece, and highlighting areas where perhaps to sow a bit of clarity, where there might be a bit of confusion still.
And I think that's where we can help, because we can be that bridge. We can bring the sector together, because actually a big proportion of the sector, they do want to make this work. They are collaborating very well. I think what they are asking for as well is more collaboration from the Building Safety Regulator, and more communication and engagement.
That's where it gets complicated.
It is, So the Building Safety Regulator don't want to engage that way. They want to mark your own work, as it will, instead of giving you the answers, and that's the compliance issue. But I think there's a lot of grey areas, especially with the M&E side of things, and complex buildings when you're talking healthcare and social care and other types of complex buildings. I don't know whether they can prove me wrong here, but I don't know whether they've got that skill set within the BSR to look at that real complex issues in really complex buildings. And as we say, all buildings, irrespective of the height, are covered by the Building Safety Act. And there will be changes.
Jason, I'm going to throw, I've got some questions just coming in here, and sorry to put you on the spot first.
No.
So a question that's come in, is there any difference in risk for an in-house FM versus building owner reference accountability under the Building Safety Act?
No. Everybody's accountable under the Building Safety Act.
Yeah, full stop.
Full stop.
They have, but I suppose on one hand you've got an accountable person regime, don't you?
Well, you'd have a principal accountable person,
Yeah.
or PAP, to use the terminology, and an accountable person. If we think for a moment, just going on that then, if we take a big NHS estate for a moment, we've all been involved with those, you can have an estate that has multiple buildings, okay? You could have a principal accountable person, let's just say an owner for a moment.
Yeah.
Then you could have multiple accountable persons on that estate, because you could fundamentally have a facility manager and his operators, his staff, in each one of those buildings. So this isn't just a linear stop. You can have huge estates. Similar, you could have a smaller estate. You have a principal accountable person, owner, accountable person, facilities manager. But they must all, it takes us back slightly to the competence again, because the principal accountable person must have full knowledge. And I know it's easy for me to say that, and I appreciate, full knowledge of the regulations. Yes, it's difficult, but you must be competent and know what you're employing somebody to do and ask, as well as the facilities manager.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
There is a second question here, so let's deal with both of these at the same time. Do you think decision makers and asset directors working in non-high-risk buildings, built environment, understand their client roles in the delivery of life cycle and variations where they trigger B-reg materiality?
Oh, okay.
That sounds like that's more technical. I must admit that's beyond my technical expertise.
So, are we talking about the life cycle of a project, or are we talking about the life cycle of an asset?
Well, I don't know. Is the honest answer. I think that's the question I've got written here. So,
so that'll vary. It's probably twofold, isn't it? They should understand the life cycle of their property, or what they are designing and building. So we go back to the golden thread of information there, from conception to completion to maintenance, which we'll touch on later. So you must understand your project in full. If you're maintaining and you're looking at the life cycle of an asset, then you should understand what that life cycle means and how to maintain that asset to increase the life cycle of that asset.
I'm being pinged with a bit more detail. So
Okay.
My main concern is the current lack of understanding of how the new Building Safety Act secondary amendments and non-high-risk building life cycle variations delivery trigger B-reg materiality, and asset directors and FM directors are presently ignoring Building Safety Act implications in the existing built environment and capital works.
Okay, so the Building Safety Act, so I'll have to look a little bit what we do in SFG20 then with this, I think. So the Building Safety Act is primary legislation. So the Building Safety Act mentions maintenance. There's probably 12 references of maintenance in the Building Safety Act. It doesn't tell you frequencies or how to maintain. Okay, so we'll just put that to one side at the moment. So what we have to do is we have to come all the way down to secondary legislation. For example, the Fire Safety England regulations, Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, etc. We have to come all the way down to get those particular tasks that would maintain that asset in line with the Building Safety Act.
Right.
So, sorry, it's a long way round, but it's the only way I can explain it. So there's not a particular maintenance task within the Building Safety Act. We have to come down linear to secondary legislation to find that. And it's only, we would get it from the Fire Safety England regulations, where we would then get monthly checks, recommendations on fire safety, fire doors, wayfinder signage, etc. But the checks are there and the checks are clear. So if you're carrying out those checks in line with secondary legislation, you will have a traceable reference to primary legislation, i.e. the Building Safety Act.
And we've made that really clear with an SFG20.
Yes. So what we've done in SFG20 is we've implemented that, as well as recently I've just found myself and my team have just managed to link the higher risk terminology with high rise, because we know the Building Safety Act talks about higher risk. Secondary legislation is high rise. So we've had to link that as well to make sure we've got that terminology in there, because fundamentally SFG20 tasks are from secondary legislation. So it's really saying to people, to be clear, that the Building Safety Act mentions maintenance, rightly so. You must maintain, you must sustain, you must maintain, but the tasks come from secondary legislation. But that's not to say that there's not an implementation if you don't undertake them.
So hopefully that answers the
Sorry, it's a long way
round.
round.
No, I think that's
Yeah.
been really helpful. Hopefully that answers the viewers' questions. If anybody
Yeah.
else has got any other questions on that, please do ping them in. Or any other questions?
Sorry, you've just got one other. You've got
Yep.
some other legislation in there. You've got the Health and Safety at Work Act as well.
Yeah.
What still requires you to maintain a building.
Yes.
And it also mentioned capital. So if you've got capital works, they've got to comply. You've got to comply with the building regulations if you've got capital works. So, you know, it's the Building Safety Act is encompassing everything, but I don't think it's as clear as it could be.
Yes.
There could be some clearer, shall we say, plain English sort of terminology to say this is the Building Safety Act.
And I think until we get that,
Yeah.
hopefully that will come, because documents are continually being amended. Myself and the team carry out multiple amendments. I'm always saying it's circular. It's a circular approach. This isn't linear. This isn't fixed. Regulations are constantly updating and moving.
And the Building Safety Act probably isn't completely sort of put to bed yet, is it? I mean, there's probably still more changes coming down the track. And what changes do you think might be still to come around this area? There's obviously, I think, been a phase 2 inquiry report published recently, which may have an implication on the what next.
Yeah.
Any insight in terms of what might be tweaked or changed, or even changed completely?
Yeah, I think one of the key recommendations for the report was to reduce the arbitrary height, or get rid of the arbitrary height, and base it on the vulnerability of people to be evacuated from a building. And I think that's the right course of action.
Yeah.
But you could say then that will bring every building into the higher risk category, which I think that would have to then be redefined. But it's a sensible solution, and I think the reason why it hasn't been implemented before is that then if every building had to be registered, there'd be too many to register in the time of the higher risk buildings. You know, by the 1st of October last year, 18,000 buildings, whatever it was, you know, there would have been hundreds of thousands of buildings to be registered, and I just don't think you could do it. But I think it'll come down in stages. Maybe 11 metres, and then maybe no height at all. So
sort of in line with the Fire Safety Act. Yeah.
I think I don't disagree that I think there needs to be a review of the higher risk building definition. But the Grenfell Phase 2 inquiry report recommended another 58 changes to industry. On top of, we're 2.5 years into the new building safety regime, and I think it's fair to say that we're really still trying to grind out the detail of the changes that were implemented in October, when the duty holder rules and the golden thread and the mandatory occurrence reporting, and it goes on and on and on, when they were implemented, and there isn't sufficient clear guidance really on what does good look like on a lot of these implementation phases, like a Gateway 2 application. So all of the recommendations in the Phase 2 inquiry report were absolutely sensible. There's some other recommendations whereby any changes to approved documents, statutory guidance, should include industry practitioners. I think that's a good thing to do, because it's all very well policymakers setting policy, but if they want the policy implemented in an efficient and effective way and for it to work, then you need industry practitioners to actually consult and debate on whether it's practically possible. But there are a lot of changes, and so for sure we're going to see more changes happening next year. But I wouldn't want them to disrupt the good work that's already happening now. And so I think we need to be very careful about phasing the implementation of yet more changes in when we're still trying to fight with the clarity on the existing changes that the Act has brought in.
Yeah. And what's the take-up been on the register of the buildings under the current definition? Are we now sat at 100% registration, or are we?
Oh,
I wouldn't like to comment on that. I think
yeah, that's.
But is it,
you know, I think all buildings had to be registered, and I think they got there.
yeah.
But there was a percentage that wasn't very close to the time, but there might be the odd ones that slipped through.
Right.
Um,
I think there was an underestimation of how many higher risk buildings actually needed to be registered. And I mean, the cladding remediation programme is behind.
The backlog.
Yeah.
And,
huge.
and actually, if anything needs to take a priority, that does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other points on the Phase 2 report that you think might have a material impact on the space?
Well, I think there's always going to be an impact. Let's be realistic with changes. You know, we've seen, as of last week, there's a British standard change coming in. There's changes coming to electrical amendments. There's changes coming to fire amendments. They're going to have to, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a circular approach. Now, whether this isn't just maintenance, this is from an installation point of view. And notoriously, contractors don't like change. I was a contractor, we don't like change. We're already chasing our tails here with what's happening. But I have to say, the Building Safety Act is the right thing. It's for safety. We don't want anything like that happening again. So it needs to be implemented. They implemented it. And at the time of implementation, you look in there is provisions in there for change. It's going to be a circular approach. How fast that comes in is going to be what affects us, I think, really. Whether they phase it, the changing of the HIRB references, I read that, and I must say I'm with Mark, really, with that.
I suppose you've got a scenario where you might have vulnerable people in a bungalow, in a care facility, for example, which seems like a very high-risk environment, but wouldn't qualify under the Act.
Yeah.
But probably.
However, I have to say there, what we must look at slightly, if we move away for a moment, is if you look at the M&E installations as a whole, and you think of fire safety for a moment, because let's look at what the Building Safety Act is. It is fire safety. If we look at the systems in there, and you have a care facility or you have a hospital, etc., high-rise, they should be having things like an L1 system in there, fire alarm, should be having sprinkler systems, should be having activated lift controls.
Yeah.
This isn't a new thing. This has been part of design for a very long time.
Yeah.
So all we're saying is now we're trying to get this implemented in. The Building Safety Act is saying at the beginning, let's bring everybody together.
Yeah.
And let the regulator as well. It'd be good if they speak to industry.
The regulator's got a big part to play here.
Huge. Yes.
And we haven't spoken about the regulator much, but it's probably an area that would be good to, how's that working at the moment, and what sort of things could we do as an industry to help the regulator do what it needs to do to ensure that everybody is compliant?
But I think the industry's there.
Yeah.
I would stand here and I say we're here. We're here to, whether you're M&E, whether you're designers, whether you're architects, we're here to help. We're here to communicate. We're here to talk. Don't leave us out. You need that input. I mean, we don't know what goes on behind the scenes there, and I know myself from what I do how complicated it is with bringing standards and legislation to force. But talk to industry, bring a technical session, because the more input you get from industry, the better it will be. What industry, we feel like they're over there and they're away from us at the moment. And it's this scary body, and you're just implementing all this change onto us. Unless you communicate and have effective, as we've said, communication and changing behaviour.
And Mark, have you dealt with the regulator much?
No. We don't see much of the regulator. And I think they are quite standoffish. And I think a lot of it's around the blame culture as well. So they're looking at marking your own work as it would be, rather than telling you what to do. So we're building control. At one point, we're consultative. You used to have a dialogue with building control. You don't have that dialogue now. You've got to say your building complies to the building regulations. And I think that's where a lot of it's falling down, is that we do know a lot, You know, we've got a lot of guidance out there. We've got a lot, you know, there's SFG, there's BESA, there's BESA with a lot for the M&E side of things. But I think a lot of the time, and this is something Dame Judith Hackett alluded to, is we blindly follow this guidance. But I think the building safety regulator is on demand at the moment, and I think they'd be open to that, and they need more government backing, more funding, because they can only work to what guidance they've got is the approved documents.
Yeah.
So this ability to be able to design iconic buildings and all that sort of stuff can go away, and they can only look at that functional requirement, where there's lots of other ways to design a building other than just the approved documents. And I always say about risk-based design instead of just following guidance. But at the moment, I don't think the BSR will be able to cope with alternate design. So you're looking at guidance only. And I think that's where it's falling down. So I'd like to... I agree with what the BSR are doing in terms of being a bit standoffish. So making sure that your building does comply and you know it complies, not being told it complies. You've got to tell them it complies. But I feel like there should be a separate technical section. And it's all about the blame game, I think, a lot of it, is that they're there to advise technically. So you need someone with a knowledge of the BSR, but a separate who can provide that technical guidance or technical input going forward. Yeah. So I think there needs to be some changes to that.
Do you have a view as well?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the first thing we need is a well-funded, well-resourced building safety regulator. And at the moment, it's not quite match fit. And I know that they're recruiting, but it's difficult at the moment because Gateway 2 has huge backlogs, and there's very few applications that are actually meeting the requirements. Yeah. But this is costing some developers up to £49,000 every week that their project is delayed at Gateway 2. And another point that we actually need a regulator that will enforce its own regulations. And I think over the years, especially on the mechanical side of building engineering services, that enforcement hasn't happened with the building regulations. We need a regulator that has teeth. Now, has teeth for those that are knowingly not complying. There's a lot of the industry that are really trying to do the right thing, and they are trying to actually meet compliance, but then they're still asking, well, what does that look like? And as Mark says, I think there is a gap whereby the regulator, I do understand, they are marking the homework. They're not going to do your homework for you. You've got to evidence and justify why the building meets the design intent and the building regulations. However, before that point, there are some queries because there is conflicting information in the statutory guidance. Where do we go to ask that question? And that's what the sector are looking for, that collaboration. We're all in this together. It isn't the building safety regulator and the industry. The Building Safety Act at its highest level is about being competent to undertake the work that you've been tasked to do, doing it in a compliant manner in line with relevant requirements, and communicating, collaborating and coordinating. And that's what we want to do with the regulator. And I was on some other industry panels, and some of the major contractors are saying, do we need to second people into the building?
What a fantastic
because
idea.
We will do that.
They do it in all other industries. So, yeah.
Because we want to. We want to move forward. We want to be compliant, and we want to make this work. We want safer buildings.
Yeah. Would you? Is that something that you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need someone in from every sort of level. So from contractor, designer, architect, structural engineers, they all need to be in there, so you can have a rounded view of what that building is, because there is quite a few gaps in design. From, there's there's always gaps from an M&E point of view. So we use a BESA stages 4I to 4III. There's always that little bit of argument of what the contractor has to do or what the designer should have done. And I think that step is missing. And I think the BSR will miss that step if you don't have people in there who really know about that step.
Yeah.
So you get a designer will go to a generic design, and then the contractors put in the correct equipment, etc. Go to stage 5, do the bracketry. If the BSR haven't got that expertise in there to understand all that, then that's where it's going to fall down. And one of the biggest areas where I see is fire dampers on your fire compartmentation, and not having the correct detailing in for the wall types. Because there's a lot of installations out there what are not compliant, and they've not got certified testing on the dampers. So the designer needs to know that, but so does the installer. And then that's where the manufacturers have to come through, the product regulator and all that comes together. So I think we do need some from industry, from all different types, to go into the BSR and help educate them going forward. Like I say, it's collaborative. It's a cultural change.
Yeah.
What we need.
And in a world where technical competency and skills are in high demand and short supply, pulling that sort of knowledge out of the industry for the betterment of the industry to work as efficiently as possible has to be a good thing, doesn't it? I mean, it has to be a sensible thing to do.
Absolutely.
I think training and competence go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, and we've got to remember as well that, as you rightly say, there's a shortage of industry professionals now, mechanical and electrical. Younger generations are coming through, but not as they did, let's say 20 years ago. We must also be aware we don't want to scare them away.
Yeah.
Here, you know, we don't want to say there's all this and all this. You have to train, you have to be competent, but you've also, it's got to go, as Mark rightly said, right from the beginning. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, for me, I would get a drawing, a blank drawing, and said, design this. It was based on cost, always cost, cheapest cost, etc. What we're saying is now, let's get everybody in at the beginning. When that initial person walks on that site.
I mean, I've had an interesting, just on that sort of the scaring people away thing that you just mentioned. I've had an interesting question in from one of the listeners. Do any of the speakers have any update from the BSR on the exodus of building control officers from the industry? The BSR stated in May 24 that 1,400 registered BCOs were needed to serve UK construction, with just 90 registered.
I don't think they've met those targets because it's
targets.
now a regulated profession.
Yes.
I know that there is government funding to try and encourage and train inspectors to come in and register. But that is a big worry for a project and this is where that early collaboration needs to come in, because actually it's an excellent point because that's another huge challenge over the next few years. We've got ambitious building targets. If we cannot get a building inspector engaged early within that project, that is another delay point. So yes, that is going to be a very challenging period over the next few years to get the volume of inspectors that we need.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at the potential build programme, as you said, for new houses, you're going to need a lot more in there for that process, and it just doesn't come down to fire or structural safety. It's all about the ventilation, the mould, everything like that. So we do need more people to go into that profession, and like you say, it's a regulated profession now. So probably the education industry has to come to the table as well to provide more courses for approved inspectors or building control approvers, or even, you know, when you do a degree or an apprenticeship, there's an element of that you can do so you can move into that profession. You know, so it is, again, it's about training. and competency. But you know, a lot will go out of the industry now and think, well, I can be a consultant more than being a building control approver, and I can just consult on this. And I've seen you know, a little bit of that recently, where they've come out of the building control because they're not a building control officers per se now. They're an approver, so they don't have that dialogue, and it might make the job less enjoyable for them. So they might move out and move into more of a consultative role.
It sort of knits quite a lot of things together there, doesn't it? Sort of skills, attracting people into industry to actually do the work and want to sort of try and close that skills and knowledge gap that seems to be, you know, potentially building up a bit of a bottleneck of actually being able to get stuff done.
But it's not just on ground level. You know, if we go all the way down to granular here, you know, we can go labourers, we can go cleaners, cleaning companies at cleaning sites, all the way up mechanical, electrical, pipe fitters, on and on and on. So if you look at all the different trades all the way up to building surveyors, architects, designers, if you've got all these different elements of people not coming to industry, who are not going to be there at the beginning of a project, or not going to have that knowledge and experience that the Building Safety Act requires, we're going to have a bottleneck there. And it's up to us, you know, to encourage them into that industry, to talk about it and say, yes, it looks scary, it's this big act. So did the Health and Safety at Work Act, so did Electricity at Work regulations. Everything looks scary, the Building Act, when it first comes in.
So I was having a conversation with somebody recently saying, you know, the pay rates are climbing rapidly off the back of the shortage in supply. So maybe it's also communicating a bit of that this is a career which comes potentially with decent pay rates, and as a real opportunity, particularly for young people looking, you know, when they're thinking about what to go and do next.
You know, I can speak for electrical and mechanical. They're fantastic industries, you know, and the building industry is always a fantastic industry, and we shouldn't. This is a act that's come in force because of what happened. We shouldn't look at it as stopping people coming in the industry. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't have an implication on, because we've got to split this here as SMEs, small contractors, your mechanical electricians, to tier ones, big contractors who have that and are thinking about this, as Rachel said, who are dealing with this. So there's multiple layers in that cake there that we have to look at. But each one of those layers is not any less important than the other.
I've got one more question that's come in. Do you think the cost of BM, TRADA and FIRAS accreditation are putting good contractors off when it comes to maintaining? Again, it's a sort of skills point.
There's going to be a cost to everything, isn't there?
That's what I was going to say.
The problem, where the Building Safety Act looks at, it doesn't look at cost. And one of the key aspects of Dame Judith Ackley's Building a Safer Future was this race to the bottom as well. And we're still seeing a lot of that. It's a race to the bottom. And I think trade associations have to cover their costs. But maybe this is where, and you know, it's difficult because the situation we're in now as a country is maybe government has to put more money into this to actually get a full register of contractors, and we're all registered and deemed competent. And again, we're coming back to that competency, but for individual associations, I don't think I could answer that question.
What do you think?
I don't really know. I don't understand what the BM TRADA cost is, so
I'm
that's
glad you
not
don't, because I
something.
didn't either.
Right, okay. So can you just repeat the question?
I've actually ticked it as answered on here, so I can't reread it, Jason.
Well
I'd
done.
agree with Rob.
Yeah.
There's always going to be cost.
Fine.
There's cost. There's always going to be cost with these. But we're back to the circular thing of competence again.
Yeah.
You're defining what is competence. So electrically, I'm with the NIC. I'm competent. I'm not going to say, how? And we've got to not be afraid of saying, well, because of this. Not, well, because I am. All we're saying is we're laying it out now. You're basically laying out your knowledge and your competence, and we are the Building Safety Act saying, why are you competent? Show us, what is this competence here? Who are you registered with?
I think what the Act is certainly encouraged in terms of competence is that if you, in decades gone by, if you had served your indentured apprenticeship, you were deemed as competent.
Yeah.
End of. Now, competence is something that is moving. It's a reassessment of competence because technology moves on, industry practices move on. You need to maintain competence now. It isn't just a one course and you're competent. And that you need to invest. As a company, you need to invest.
You do.
But again, it's another challenge because there really is a lack of capacity in our education and training system. We have there's working groups working on pathways to competence, and what does competence actually mean for all of the grades within the industry, and that work's ongoing. But it's going to take some years to actually come to fruition.
I think the thing is as well, in the past it would be the contractor's competent, so you'd have a company and the company would be competent, but we need to linear that down. So for myself as the electrical company, if the company is competent and qualified to current wiring regulations, your staff need to be as well, 17th, 18th, 19th edition, where perhaps in the past that wasn't the case. So we need to make sure that the competence of a company follows down to the competence of the staff. So it's everybody again within that layer cake. And if you break that cake down, it's huge.
Yeah.
But we're not asking something here that has not always been there. If you're installing gas or you're installing, you need to be competent installing gas. If you're installing an electrical system, you need to be competent in what you're doing and installing to current regulations. And that follows through to maintenance. You're maintaining, you must maintain to current regulations.
I think we've got just over 5 minutes left. And I just wanted to perhaps end on, as we are at the SFG20 Virtual Summit, what are the things that we've been doing recently, Jason, to really help people navigate some of those things? And I know you in particular have been working incredibly hard on some of the technical schedules that we run through the SFG20 system.
Yeah.
And if you could just give us a flavour for that, and where are the things that are probably coming still down the track for us to sort of focus in on?
Well, yeah. So we've made a lot of updates to our 5 schedules. So fundamentally, we previously had 1 schedule. We've split that now into sort of 20 schedules, covers multiple regions, incorporating items on fire safety that is relevant to the Building Safety Act. So we're doing that. It's a linear approach. What I must say is within SFG20, it's linear. So myself and the technical team, it's ever changing. As regulation comes in, we must change with it. In direct response to the Building Safety Act, as I mentioned earlier, we created schedules specifically for wayfinding signage, secure information boxes. We had to update critical lifts, critical life generation, to put that in to our schedules in specific response to the Building Safety Act. But as new changes come in with the Building Safety Act, we're obviously going to have to implement that over now, whether that's just a small terminology change, which it may be, or whether it's a frequency change. But all we can do as SFG20 is make sure that we have that most up-to-date information there for our subscribers, so when they go into a higher risk building or a high-rise building, they know that they're doing an additional monthly check, they know they have an operational check. And we also have to comply to our definition. I know we've not touched on, but we agreed a statutory definition so that we could define our tasks correctly. So we've been implementing that as well. And that ties in with primary legislation such as the Building Safety Act, Health and Safety at Work regulations. So we're constantly evolving. I want to say to people, it's never still. We're in the middle of updating at the moment, which is a huge update to Amendment 3 of BS 7671, which is wiring regulations. So that's huge for the team. I've seen some regulations that's just coming in on file that we may have to implement as well.
Yeah. I mean, I know how much of the content has been touched by the team, the technical team. It has been an enormous amount of work, and there's still bits and pieces that we've probably got to just
Yeah.
focus in on. I mean, I just wonder from an industry point of view, is there anything that you would like to perhaps put out there that where we could help a bit more?
No, not really. I think for me, the Building Safety Act's all about behavioural change, and whether that's in design, installation or maintenance. And I don't think as in a schedule you could get that behavioural change, but I think there's got to be an openness to using maintenance schedules and having correct maintenance when that building's been designed. And it's all about the golden thread, as was alluded to before, and is a requirement of the Building Safety Act. So I think having a schedule, what's detailed and on the ball, is a really good process to have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then from a BESA point of view, just to sort of tie that all together, there's obviously the work that you're doing at the moment around surveying the industry. Is there anything that we can do that perhaps off the back of the research you did, which you touched on the beginning of this session, is there anything that we should be taking away as SFG20 and really trying to help industry? Because I think that's kind of the big thing that I'm hearing here is that there's a real desire for everybody to get this right. It's really complicated. There's still quite a lot of confusion, and there's an under-resourced regulator sat there, again trying to help, but maybe needing some industry help to execute on what they need to do. Just wonder if you've got any final thoughts around how to bring some of that stuff together.
I think you're already doing it. I think we're all working together really well because I think, the Building Safety Act isn't just about meeting legislation requirements. It's about moving forward as a collective so that we actually focus on quality rather than speed and cost. And that's exactly what you're trying to do within the schedules. You maintaining to the highest standards.
And it's a team. It's a team effort. We've all got to work together. That's SFG20, BESA, describes everybody else. We're all working together to try to make industry better. We're not doing this to cause people more frustration, more money. We're trying to just safety must be paramount in everything that we do. It's always been there. Most contractors that I know and have dealt with work incredibly hard to make sure they operate safely. So all we're doing now is we're just trying to bring that together. And if we can all just bring that together and work together, work as one, and so Regulator works with industry, I'm sure we can get there.
And provide some really clear guide rails and guardrails on the processes to follow.
Yes.
What information is needed at which point, which is where hopefully industry might be able to help on a secondee basis if they're open to that.
Yeah.
To drive clarity into what is a complicated
Let the contractors
landscape.
help you.
Yeah.
They've got all that experience and knowledge, and if they're willing to help, take the help.
Well, I'd just like to thank you all for coming today. We hugely appreciate your time. I hope people have enjoyed that session. And I think that ends the session on the Building Safety panel. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.